March 2nd, 1945. A wet, miserable dawn crawled over the edges of northern Germany as Private Thomas Alistair Grayson climbed out of the back of the Bedford lorry, boots sinking into the mud that clung to everything like a curse. He pulled his greatcoat tighter, breath rising in pale clouds as he scanned the courtyard of the temporary holding facility. The place had once been a livestock cooperative. Long barns, low stone walls, roofs of dark timber. But now it was absorbed into the mess of war. Sandbags, wires, guard posts, and a cluster of Allied officers hunched over maps inside a converted office. The war was entering its final convulsions, but here, in this forgotten corner, the lines blurred between front, rear, and occupation zone. Orders changed by the hour. People arrived, disappeared, or were marched out and never mentioned again. Thomas was 26, hardened by years of fighting from the beaches of Normandy to the frozen fields of the Ardennes, but something about the assignment he'd received that morning made him uneasy. His sergeant had handed it over with a look that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite warning, just a tired flicker of something unspoken. "Guard duty," he'd said. "Special civilian, no fuss. Keep her alive, keep her contained, and don't ask bloody questions." Then he walked away. She, a civilian prisoner, not a soldier, not a spy officially, but marked as sensitive. Thomas approached the side barn where the prisoner was kept. A single lantern burned above the door, its flame shuddering in the draught. Inside, the light spilled just enough to show a small cot, a wooden crate repurposed as a table, and a woman sitting upright with her hands in her lap, staring at the far wall as if she refused to acknowledge the existence of any man who stepped near her. She looked no older than 32. Shoulder-length dark hair braided loosely, jaw set with the kind of quiet certainty only grief could carve. Her clothes, a faded wool dress, patched shawl, and battered leather boots, were clean but worn, and the posture with which she held herself suggested discipline rather than resignation. Thomas sensed immediately that she wasn't fragile. Whatever she had survived, it had not broken her, only sharpened what already lay beneath. She didn't look at him when he entered, only said, calmly, "You are the new one." Thomas cleared his throat. "Private Thomas Grayson, I'll be your guard today, and likely the next several days." "Until what?" she asked, her German accent soft, educated, almost gentle. "Until they shoot me, or until they decide I'm useful again." Her tone wasn't hostile, just brutally honest. He had heard similar voices in Normandy, in bombed-out Belgian villages, in emergency field tents where civilians searched rubble for children. The voice of someone who expected nothing from the world, because the world had already taken everything. "That's not my concern, ma'am," he said. "My concern is ensuring no harm comes to you." That made her finally look at him. Her eyes were a deep grey-green, sharp as bayonet steel. "How strange," she murmured, "to be guarded for one's safety in a war where protecting anyone is impossible." Minutes bled into hours as Thomas maintained watch. She sat quietly, immovable, occasionally rubbing her wedding ring, a thin silver band that looked almost too delicate for the world she lived in. He caught her doing it several times, her thumb moving over it instinctively, as if it were the last thread tying her to a life that no longer existed. Around the 30-minute mark of the day's first hour, a lieutenant stepped in to question her about a cache of documents allegedly linked to the German resistance. Thomas stood by, silent, eyes forward, hearing fragments. "Your husband, executed. Your group, sabotage. Rail lines, you delivered messages. Sheltering Allied airmen." She answered sparingly, refusing to break under pressure. Thomas felt something twist in his chest, respect maybe, or guilt, or something harder to name. After the officer left, the barn sank back into quiet. Rain began tapping on the roof like 1,000 impatient fingers. Thomas shifted his weight, watching her as she watched the floor. At minute 45, she finally spoke. "You should not be here." "Where else should I be?" he asked lightly. "With your unit," she replied. "With men who need you, not guarding a widow who no longer matters." "Not true," Thomas answered before thinking. "Everyone matters." That made her pause, eyes turning toward him again with a softness he hadn't seen yet, like she was studying him for fractures or truth. She looked away after a moment, as though ashamed of having shown anything human. The final 15 minutes of the hour stretched out slowly. Outside, the compound buzzed with distant engines, boots slogging through mud, radios crackling orders. Inside, she sat motionless, only speaking once more. "My name. You should at least know it, since you are assigned to me." He nodded. She held his gaze for the first uninterrupted moment. "My name is Elizabeth Ritter." Thomas felt it settle into him, a name with weight and tenderness at once. Elizabeth Ritter. A woman marked enemy by some, ally by others. A ghost to her husband's memory, a survivor of a resistance war no one spoke openly of. And now, she was his responsibility. But as the hour ended, Thomas sensed something unsettling. He wasn't here just to guard her. Something about her, her quiet fire, her grief, her defiance, pulled at him in a way he did not yet understand. Something that would only grow, something that could cost both their lives. The afternoon light bled dimly through the warped wooden slats of the barn as Thomas resumed his second hour of guard duty. The rain had softened to a mist, drifting in thin sheets across the courtyard, and the air inside the building felt colder than before, as if the coming twilight carried its own kind of warning. Elizabeth Ritter sat where she always seemed to sit, back straight, hands folded loosely in her lap, gaze fixed on something far away and unreachable. 30 minutes into the second hour, a quiet rumble of distant artillery rolled in from the west, reminding everyone that though this region lay behind the forward push, the war had not loosened its grip. Every so often, Elizabeth would glance toward the sound, her expression unreadable, but not fearful. She had lived with danger for too long to fear noise. At minute 33, Thomas offered her a tin cup of warm water. She accepted it wordlessly, nodding in thanks as she drank in slow, controlled sips. He noticed the way her fingers curled around the cup, carefully, as one who had learned to protect even the simplest comforts. When she handed it back, her eyes lingered on him for a moment longer than necessary, as though she were attempting to understand something about his presence. "You are different from the others," she said quietly. "How so?" "You look at me," she replied, turning her head slightly. "Not through me." Thomas didn't know how to respond to that. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was the way she held herself, composed, dignified, with an inner strength that defied the filth and ruin around them. Or perhaps it was her story, one he only knew in pieces. A German widow of a resistance fighter, killed by his own government for treason, a woman who had risked her life to help Allied pilots escape, a woman now caught between nations and ideologies, claimed by none. At the 40-minute mark, thunder rolled again. But it wasn't thunder. A low-flying Allied plane roared overhead, rattling the loose boards above them. Thomas watched Elizabeth flinch. Not from fear, but recognition. She tilted her head, listening intently to the fading engine. "An American reconnaissance plane," she murmured. "Late war model. They fly low when returning from the east." "You know aircraft sounds?" She hesitated. "I learned to know everything that helped me survive." The next 15 minutes remained silent until the door creaked open and an officer entered, a stern-faced captain with the look of a man who had no patience left. He studied Elizabeth for a long moment before shifting his attention to Thomas. "Any trouble?" "No, sir," Thomas replied. "Good," the captain muttered. "She'll be interrogated again tomorrow morning. A transport may arrive to move her to HQ." Elizabeth tensed at that, her fingers tightening against her shawl. When the officer left, the barn felt even smaller, as though the walls had leaned in closer. "Do you know what they want from me?" she asked softly. I'm not told those details, Thomas said. Then I will tell you, she whispered. They want names of men my husband worked with, men who are dead. Men who were already executed before the snow melted last winter. They want me to betray ghosts. Thomas swallowed hard. I'm sorry. She exhaled, slow and steady, as though releasing a weight she had carried too long. I have nothing left to give them. The hour reached its halfway point when she finally unfolded her story, not as a confession, but as a quiet release. My husband, Wilhelm, was a schoolteacher, she began. Kind, gentle. He believed Germany could still be saved, not by Hitler, but by ordinary people refusing to bow. Her eyes drifted upward, as if she could see his face in the dust-filled rays of light. He helped British pilots who crashed near the forest, brought them food, hid them in cellars. When the Gestapo found out, her voice cracked for the first time. They executed him in the courtyard of our home. Thomas felt something twist inside him. The image came unbidden, sharply illuminated by Elizabeth's trembling words. I heard the gunshots from the attic, she continued, and I did not cry, because crying would have exposed me, and they would have found the pilot I was hiding. You saved him, Thomas said, almost under his breath. Yes, and several others. But it cost me everything. She paused, rubbing her wedding ring. I kept this, though, the last piece of him that still warms my hand. Minutes 39 to 52 passed in heavy silence, punctuated only by the slow rhythm of rain and the crackle of distant gunfire. At minute 53, Thomas spoke again. Elizabeth, why did you not run, before they arrested you? She looked at him, and for the first time he saw the full weight of her exhaustion. Because where does a woman like me run? The Nazis marked me as a traitor. The Allies marked me as German. My home was burned, my husband dead. I had no country left, only the hope that I could stand before someone, anyone, and say the truth. And now? He asked. And now, she whispered, I stand before you. The final minutes of the second hour drifted slowly toward dusk. Thomas watched her as she rested against the wooden wall, eyes closed but not asleep, simply preserving strength as though she expected to be called to prove herself again and again until nothing was left. But he felt something changing. He couldn't name it yet, couldn't articulate the pull in his chest whenever she looked at him, or the sense of purpose anchoring him to her safety. He only knew this. She wasn't just a prisoner anymore. She was becoming the reason he didn't want to be anywhere else. And soon, the world outside would force both of them to face that truth. The third hour began as the day slouched into evening, the sky bruised with fading purples and sinking gold beneath the heavy cloud cover. A wind moved through the compound, carrying hints of wood smoke and the distant churn of engines. Thomas returned to his post with an unsettled tightness in his chest, as though he were walking toward a crossroads he hadn't agreed to reach. Elizabeth sat curled slightly inward, arms wrapped around herself for warmth. The lantern flickered beside her, casting slow-moving shadows across her face. She looked up as he entered, blinking softly. And for the first time, just for a heartbeat, Thomas saw something fragile flicker behind her stern composure. Relief. Not large or obvious, but unmistakably real. She was relieved he was the one returning. At minute 4 of the hour, he set a small ration tin on the crate table. Bread and stew, he said. Best I could find. She eyed it warily. Is it permitted? Technically, he replied. No one told me I couldn't. A faint smile touched her lips, the first he'd seen. Then thank you. She ate slowly, savouring each bite with the quiet gratitude of someone who had learned to measure every small mercy. He leaned against the wall near the door, keeping watch, but his eyes drifted often, toward her hands, her tired posture, the line of her jaw illuminated by the lamp's amber glow. At minute 13, she finally broke the silence. You said earlier that everyone matters, she murmured. Do you truly believe that? Even now? Even someone like me." He stepped closer without realizing it. "Especially someone like you." Her breath caught almost imperceptibly. The barn's shadows trembled between them, thick with the kind of unspoken tension neither dared name. Around minute 18, a commotion jolted the courtyard. Raised voices, boots thudding, a radio sputtering with incoming messages. Thomas stiffened, listening. "Elizabeth," he said quietly, "stay behind me." The door burst open at minute 20. A lieutenant strode in, pale with cold and irritation. "Grayson, orders have changed," he snapped. "The prisoner is being transferred tonight. High Command wants her moved before dawn." Elizabeth's spine straightened. "Transferred where?" "That's above your clearance," the lieutenant snapped. Thomas's jaw tightened. He didn't trust the way the officer avoided answering. He'd heard rumours, civilians quietly disappearing when intelligence departments argued over jurisdiction. He knew how easily transfer could mean interrogated until silence. When the lieutenant left, Thomas turned to her. "Elizabeth, what are they moving you for?" She shook her head. "I don't know, but I fear it is not for my safety." At minute 28, she stood for the first time in hours, steadying herself against the table. Her eyes glistened not with tears, but with a rising, armoured determination. "If they are sending me away," she said softly, "it will not be to somewhere kind." For a moment, Thomas considered saying nothing, but the truth ripped out anyway. "I won't let them harm you." She stared at him slowly, as if trying to understand whether he understood the enormity of what he had just promised. "You cannot stop orders," she whispered. "I can't," he said, "but I can protect you while I still breathe." Her eyes softened, open, bare, wounded, and hopeful. "Why?" she asked. He swallowed hard. "Because I don't think I've ever met someone as brave as you, or as honest, or as—" He stopped before the last word could escape. She stepped closer. Only a hand's breadth separated them now. "Thomas," she whispered, "if you say what I think you want to say, the world outside will destroy you for it." "And if I stay silent," he asked, "then it will destroy me." Minutes 30 through 42 passed in a hush, filled with too much meaning, too much fear, too much longing. Elizabeth sat once more, but her eyes followed him with a quiet intensity that made his pulse unsteady. Something fragile and forbidden had entered the space between them. A spark held delicately between two lives already scorched by war. At minute 43, the sky outside cracked with a distant explosion. Allied bombers miles away, striking fleeing German convoys. The compound bristled with tension. Guards moved faster. Officers barked orders, and the sense of the war accelerating toward its violent conclusion hung heavy in the air. Inside, however, the world shrank to only two people. Elizabeth turned toward him again. "When my husband died," she said, "I thought my heart died with him. I thought I would feel nothing again. Until you walked through that door." She touched the edge of her shawl, fingers trembling. "But this cannot be." "I know," he answered softly. "And yet," she whispered. Minutes flowed like slow-burning fuse twine toward an unseen explosion. The shadows thickened, the lantern dimmed, and silence settled over them like a fragile blanket neither dared disturb. At minute 51, Thomas spoke again, voice low. "If you're moved tonight, they won't let me accompany you." "I know. And I don't know what they intend." "I know. And I don't want this to be the last time I see you." She inhaled sharply, quiet but deep. Her hand lifted slightly from her lap, as though reaching for the words that refused to form. "Thomas," she said, "I am not afraid to die. I have faced death many times, but I am afraid of dying unseen, unremembered, unheld." He stepped forward slowly, once, then twice, closing the distance until he stood directly before her, close enough that he could see the faint flecks of gold in her green-grey eyes. You are seen, he whispered. You are remembered. A pause, trembling. And if you let me, you will never be alone. Her breath shuddered out. Her left hand rose, not touching him, but hovering near his chest, as though feeling the warmth radiating from him. At minute 57, she finally spoke the truth neither had dared to say aloud. I did not expect, she whispered, that in a prison camp, guarded by my enemy, I would find the only man who has ever looked at me as though my life mattered. Thomas reached for her hand, slowly, gently. His fingers closed around hers, and she didn't pull away. She closed her eyes, leaning slightly, not enough to break a rule, but enough to break his heart. At minute 59, the compound bell clanged outside, stern, urgent, signalling the arrival of the night transport. The sound jolted them both back to the edge of reality. Elizabeth opened her eyes. Thomas tightened his hold. Neither moved. Neither wanted to face what waited outside that door. At minute 60, she spoke one last time, soft, trembling, honest. Thomas, whatever happens, remember me, not as a prisoner, but as a woman who lived and loved, even when she thought both were impossible. His voice cracked. I will. Always. The door creaked open. Boots approached, orders barked, and the war, relentless as ever, reached inside the barn to tear them apart. But something had changed that no officer, no order, no war could erase. They had found each other, in the unlikeliest place. At the unlikeliest time. And nothing, neither barbed wire nor borders nor fear, would ever truly take that away.